What is going on, gunfighters? Men who are not strangers or adverse to the use of violence. Independent citizens, law enforcement, military, members of a well-regulated militia. Strong men of God. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God and a follower of Yeshua, Jesus Christ. I'll put a bio in, a more full bio at the end. Just real quickly, Marine Corps combat veteran, also Army law enforcement veteran with LAPD rifle and pistol state champion, West Coast regional champion, private contractor. With that, let's get into the day's topic. Let's talk strong and weak hand shooting. Now, this is already given out to the patrons as well as videos demonstrating strong and weak hand shooting. I've made those open to the public, so if you want to go check that out on the Patreon page, most of that stuff is just for patrons, but there is some stuff on there on this that's open to the public. You can go check that out. But that's the topic du jour, the topic of the day: strong hand, weak hand shooting. And I've run into that in the industry. It's not a weak hand. You never say weak. Call it what you want. You can call it your less tremendously awesome hand and your super duper awesome hand. I don't really care. I'm going to call it strong hand, weak hand. That's the most common nomenclature in the industry. Some places are averse to that. Just know what I'm talking about. Right hand only, left hand only shooting. Now here's the big point I want to get across to you guys. The biggest tip I can give for strong hand only, weak hand only shooting. Slow down. Seriously, a lot of people, when I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, a big reason a lot of people would fail the qual, which by the way meant you lost your job for a while, did so because they didn't slow down on the strong hand, weak hand shooting. You cannot shoot as fast as accurately. You can shoot probably just as fast. You can shoot probably just as accurately. You can't shoot as fast as accurately, as consistently, one-handed as you can two-handed. If this were the case, then you wouldn't bother to put the other hand on the gun, right? Why even bother? You could shoot just as accurately in the same amount of speed with one hand. Why would you even put the other hand on the gun? So obviously, you cannot shoot as fast as accurately, but people do. Again, I've seen that. People will try and shoot the same cadence at the same piece of steel that they were shooting both hands with one hand. And again, if you could do that, then you wouldn't ever even bother to put two hands on the gun if you could shoot just as well with one hand. And let me be clear, you can be very fast and you can be very accurate, but not as much so as two-handed. So that should tell you when you take one of the hands off the gun, you need to slow down. That old adage that I heard in the competition shooting circles, I forget where I first heard it, I don't know who first came up with it, but it's very true, and it's true in a gunfight. You can't miss fast enough to win. And going to the Rifleman's Creed in the Marine Corps, it's not the noise, it's not the smoke, it's the hits that count. We will hit. You need to hit. Better to take that extra tenth of a second, even half a second, when you're talking one-handed, and get a good hit to miss and have to make up the shot and do the entire process over again. So slow down. It's another big thing. Those sights, unless you're talking about really slow bullseye one-handed shooting, are almost certainly going to move. That handgun is going to oscillate. It's going to gyrate. It's going to move in relation to the target more so than it normally would. You have to be okay with that. You have to accept that. The more frustrated you become in that, probably the worse you're going to shoot. I had to learn this lesson over and over again many times. Take a breath. Focus on the front sight or the target / reticle, depending on what system you're using, and give a smooth press of the trigger. But you need to slow down. You need to take a breath. You need to realize that the gun is going to move a little bit more, both before you fire and after you fire. Again, if you could shoot as well with one hand as with two, you would never bother to put two hands on the gun. If you could control recoil just as well, it's kind of the same thing. You're not You can control recoil very well and better with one hand than a lot of people, but you're not going to control it as well as with both hands, so realize that. Not only is your first shot probably going to take longer, your subsequent shots, your split times. You're talking about a barn door right in front of you, which in that case is basically how fast can you manipulate that trigger and make the gun go off. But if you're talking about hitting target and anything other than bad breath distance, you're going to have to slow your cadence. See that a lot also. People miss on their first shot and they'll miss on their second or third shot because they're so used to just what's commonly known as a double tap, both hands, just slapping the trigger twice really fast when the gun is on target. Do that same cadence with one hand and you're likely not going to be on target. Again, slow down. Another thing that you probably know, but you may not, is that in general, there's different things for barricades and tactical situations, but in general, when you go to shoot one-handed, you're going to put that same foot forward. So if I transfer the gun into my right hand, my right leg goes forward. I want the weight on that, more so on that front leg. So right hand, right leg. Left hand, left leg. And you're going to want a fairly aggressive stance leaning in to that gun. Now, I in general will lock my elbows out both one-handed and two-handed. There are some exceptions when I'm using the car technique or really tight, confined space kind of drills and ground fighting. In general, I'll lock my elbows out. That is just me. There are some things I will tell you pretty much good across the board, but there's a lot of really good shooters that bend their elbows. I tend to push my elbows and lock them all the way out so that I can repeat that time after time. What did Einstein, I don't think Einstein actually said this, but it's commonly attributed to Einstein, is what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, if you look at the inverse of that, if you want the same result, hitting the same place over and over again, you must do the same thing every time. And for me, being able to lock my elbows out gives me a solid, repeatable reference point. Elbows are slightly bent. What does that mean? 3 degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, and then next time 4 degrees, 3 degrees. You get what I'm saying there. You can bend your elbows if you want. A lot of really good shooters do. I'm just telling you what I do and why I do it. Generally put that leg forward, aggressively lean into that front leg like I'm throwing a punch or similar, and I'm going to push that arm out. Some people will have that gun straight sideways like a gangster, but 45 degrees. I will only do that if I'm shooting relatively quickly at a close target. If I am shooting farther or I have the time, I like to orient my handgun in the traditional 12 o'clock position. Start talking more precise shots at distance, that offset of the gun, because your bore line and your line of sight are not the same, can play into that. Yes, you can offset for that if you're thinking about it and have the presence of mind. If I'm shooting really quick at a close target, I don't mind a little bit of cant in my gun. If I'm going a little bit farther distance and a little bit more precise of a shot, let's say a headshot, or just a targeted distance, I like that handgun at the normal 12 o'clock position. Here is another thing that I will tell you because I've learned it from people that I respect, although I never did it. They taught it, so I'm going to give you a tip. Some schools out there will teach to, if you're shooting one-handed, take your pinky off the gun. Like a high-class British tea drinker. The theory that I've heard is doing that will prevent you from torquing and flinching the gun so hard down or whatever direction. I don't do that, and here's why. In my training and experience, a flinch does not start in your fingers or in your hand or in your arm. A flinch starts in your mind. You must conquer the mind first. Shooting is, like most other martial skills, almost entirely in the mind. It manifests itself in the hand. The brain must first process what you want the body to do before it will do it. Even if it's automaticity, even if it's what we call, it's not a real thing, but muscle memory, automaticity. If you can do it without consciously thinking about it, your brain still has to send those signals. So to me, a flinch starts in the mind. You must conquer it in the mind first. And you don't have to worry so much about what your pinky's doing on the gun. That being said, you might want to try that. I like a good firm grip on the gun, especially if we're talking about repeated shots. Because again, you're not going to control recoil. You're going to shoot slower as compared to two-handed. A firm grip can help you shoot a little bit faster in my experience. If I'm not flinching, it's never really mattered to me how strong I grip the gun. If you grip it too hard, just like with two-handed, you're going to get fatigued and you're going to start to shake. So it's going to be hard to independently articulate that trigger finger without manipulating the rest of your hand. So you need to know you. You need to get out and do this and try this. Even in dry fire. Dry fire is a great place, probably better than live fire. If those sights are moving off the target in dry fire one-handed, they're almost certainly going to do that in live fire. If you can keep those sights aligned and keep that front sight on the target throughout the trigger press in dry fire, you've conquered that flinch or that aversion to the gun going off in your mind. When you go to live fire, there you go. You should always confirm live fire, but this is really a skill you can train on dry fire. Now let me give you some good drills for this. Actually, stage 1 of the new FBI qual is quite good for this, I think. And that's draw. Time limits on the FBI qual are fairly generous, let's say. This one, if you're not used to strong hand shooting, don't worry about the time limit at first. If you want to do it right, you're going to start out, if you know you're drawing one-handed, strong hand, the side that your holster should be on. It's draw, strong hand only, 3 rounds, transition, weak hand only, 3 rounds. That's a good drill. It's one of the great things about the handgun is that we can use it one-handed, right? If another arm's injured, you may have to draw the gun one-handed. If you're carrying a small child, or who knows, any number of things, you have the phone in one hand and you have someone with evil intent on the other end, you need to hold them there while you call whomever you're going to call. A lot of advantages to the handgun being able to be used with one hand. I think this is a good practical stage in the FBI qual. Drawing, 3 rounds, strong hand only. Transition, 3 rounds, weak hand only. You notice the transition in there. The next drill I'm going to give you is also very good. And that's just simply fire 1 round, strong hand only. Transition, 1 round, weak hand only. Transition, fire 1 round, strong hand only. And back and forth, strong hand only, weak hand only, strong hand only, weak hand only. Don't wear yourself out. Do, 4 rounds, 5 rounds, 6 rounds. Doesn't really matter, but you're getting a lot of practice on establishing a good transition and then a proper grip with either hand. That's important. Setting the shot up right goes a long way. You can shoot a very accurate shot with all kinds of wacky grips. I can hold a pistol upside down and pull the trigger with my pinky and get a good accurate shot. It certainly helps a lot to have a proper grip. Practicing that transition help you establish a good proper grip, and when you get a, let's say, less than ideal grip, you'll realize it and you can adjust it. There's a couple of different techniques for transitioning, but what I like, you got your good proper firing grip with your one hand, let's say your strong hand, you bring the other hand open and then you wrap that thumb behind the beaver tail of the handgun and then literally just slide it into your weak hand and establish a proper grip. And then when you go to transition again, you do the same thing. You have your 4 fingers basically together and your thumb wraps around over your other thumb but under the beaver tail, and you transition it to a nice high grip with your other hand. Again, I really encourage you to go check out the Patreon page. I'll make a lot of the one-handed only stuff available to the public, so you don't have to spend any money or anything. I do this podcast for you guys. I left a good, high-paying job to do the podcasts, to give you guys good information. I will make that information free to you on Patreon for at least for a little while. So go to Patreon. You can look up this post. There'll be some other posts that are open to the public as well if you're not a patron. Because obviously, there's things that are better done, well, first of all, in person with actual training, and second, with visuals. You can look at that and kind of see hand position, body position, things like that. Try and dig up some footage, either some more footage, and post that as well if I can find any good pages from nationals or whatnot, shooting strong hand, weak hand only, running plate racks, whatever. Anyway, with that, I want to say thanks for listening. I'll throw in the tactical verse of the day, again trying something new. So I don't want you to have to get through the bio or listen through the bio if you're not sitting. I'm just going to cut it off. I don't want you to miss the tactical verse of the day. Tactical verse of the day from Revelation. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old order of things has passed away. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. Alright, if you stayed tuned through all of that, I'm very humbled. Thank you. And to all the patrons, an additional level of thanks. Anyway, I think you should get a tactical tip after all that. And that tactical tip, there's all kinds of really cool QD, quick detach, M-lock, key mod, sling swivel attachments, Picatinny rail adapters for slings. You know what, in my opinion, is one of the best sling attachment points for modern fighting rifles? A piece of 550 cord and or a zip tie. Yeah. Now, if you care about your guns looking the absolute coolest on Instagram or your range buddies ragging you, then maybe not for you. But if you want a practical, really good, cheap sling attachment point, whether that is the old military style quad rails, I call those old now, that's kind of funny, I remember when they were kind of cutting edge, whether it's an A2 style handguard or a quad rail or LMNOP mod lock Samson rail system, whatever it is, you get the idea. There's holes in there. There's probably 2 holes in there. One of your basic manly skills we talk about on Alpha Male Podcast, tying knots. Not just like a simple overhand pretzel knot, but actual knots like a bowline or a blood knot or a lover's knot. You can take a decent piece of 550 cord and make a sling swivel attachment point. I like the slings that have the little grab clasps, literally just like a little claw. You can attach them to all kinds of things. You can make an attachment point pretty much anywhere. You can do it on the stock. You can do it right where the back plate attaches to the receiver. You can put it any number of places on the rail. Like an M16A1, if it's that old, even put an attachment point on the front sight post. And unless you're going full auto, Vietnam style, it's probably going to be fine. But on most modern rails, again, just a piece of 550 cord, you can make a strong loop and you can attach that sling. Again, if you want it to look the ultimate best on Instagram or whatever, but if you're talking about being practical, just a piece of 550 cord to attach your sling to. Not every solution needs a click on Amazon. You can probably get as good a solution, and a lot of times a quieter solution, because the metal attached or the sling attached to the 550 cord is often quieter than the metal solutions if you're trying to be clandestine, sneaky, whatever you want to call it, right? So don't think that everything needs to click on Amazon. A good, sturdy loop of 550 cord can be a great sling attachment point. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.